Hi, everybody. This is Ronelle Delmont, and I've got another great book, wonderful biography. It's gigantic, and it's about a man that I've known since childhood. I never believed he was a real person. His name was Houdini. Yeah, Houdini, by Kenneth Silverman. He's a professor, I believe, at NYU, but it's just a great biography, and it's called Houdini. No, it's called Houdini. You see the exclamation marks? There's not one exclamation mark, there are three of them. Houdini, the career of Erich Weiss. I bet you didn't know his name was Erich Weiss. You thought he was born with the name Houdini? No. Well, I've got a lot of pictures to show you and even a video clip, and I hope you're going to enjoy it because every time I read this book or anything about Harry Houdini, I have a great time. I just love the story of this man who was born in Hungary. I'm going to share the screen and we'll go through a bunch of pictures. Kenneth Silverman wrote this book about 24 years ago, and it's as good as the day that he wrote it. Look at the photograph on the cover. I'll show you a better picture of it, but Harry Houdini is naked in this picture. Don't tell anybody. He's just covered with chains, and the chains are covering the right spot. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. Let's hope this will be easy. And I'm going to find Metamorphosis. And I'm going to slideshow from beginning. There we go. And my name is Ronelle Delmont. And here we go. Metamorphosis from Erich Weiss to Harry Houdini by Kenneth Silverman. That's the name of this wonderful book. And here is, yes, hello. Can't push the picture. There it is. Okay. All right. So we've got the cover of this book and Harry Houdini. This is a made up name. His name was Erich Weiss. Weiss was born in Budapest in 1874, and unfortunately for the world and for him, he died a very young man. He was 52 years old in 1926, and I will tell you uh, the story of how he died so young. It's a famous story, but nobody ever gets it straight. So I hope I'll explain it to you if you've never heard it. Maybe some of you have never heard of Harry Houdini. But when I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn and the Lower East Side, I thought Houdini wasn't a real person. I thought Sherlock Holmes was a real person. I was confused, as most kids are, about these famous names. And when you talk about famous names, Houdini is a household name. If you want to, in fact, it's even an adjective. If you want to make fun of somebody who's doing parlor tricks, you could say, "Who do you think you are, Houdini?" And everybody will understand what you mean by that. So I'm going to clear this away, and there he is. He changes his name to Harry Weiss after he's living in America. Now, he was born in Budapest, but the family moves. There are five brothers. Harry has five brothers, and his name is Erich Weiss. When he comes to Appleton, Wisconsin, with the rest of the family, he is going to run away from home and join the circus when he's something like 9 or 10 years old. When the family ends up moving to New York City, and I will explain why they do that in a minute. But here is a photograph of the future Harry Houdini as a young Jewish man, as a track star, amateur boxer in New York City, anything to make a living because the family was quite poor. And this is the reason why. His father was a rabbi, And when they came from Hungary, Rabbi Weiss, Meyer Samuel Weiss, got a job from Hungary, from Budapest. He was hired by an Appleton, Wisconsin Jewish community that was building a synagogue, and they needed a rabbi. They hired him from Europe when he got there, and then later brought his whole family over the ocean. This is 1876 when he's uh, in the when they're building the synagogue. And unfortunately, they're going to have to fire him because Rabbi Weiss doesn't speak a word of English. And of course, he speaks Yiddish, but the American Jews don't really want to speak Yiddish in Wisconsin. It's bad enough that nobody's seen too many Jews in that state and they just want to be assimilated. And you can sort of tell by the way Rabbi Weiss looks that he's not going to fit in very well with secular Jews uh, in in that part of the country. And unfortunately, that's why the family ends up in terrible poverty. The Christian societies end up supporting this large, very large Jewish family. There are six boys, and I think there are two sisters. So it's like eight children and mama and papa. And they were supported by Christian charities mostly, and then ends up in New York. And it's there that Rabbi Weiss dies, leaving his wife Cecilia. And here's a picture of Cecilia with her son Harry in New York City in the year 1908. So this is many, many years later. And it's Harry who's going to make the biggest living for the family. Most of the brothers, they go off to college. They almost all of them become doctors of one sort or another. But Harry is different. He joined the circus when he's 10. He ran away from home so many times, not because he didn't love his mother or his family, but because he was trying to make a living for them. And he did. And he's going to make even a bigger living when he becomes enormously wealthy in New York's Harlem. He's going to own an entire townhome and take care of the family, pay for their education, because as you can figure out, somebody with the name Houdini is going to be very rich. And this is the woman that Harry ends up marrying. Now, as a Jewish man, he marries a woman who's Catholic. It isn't his mother that is unhappy about the marriage. It is her family. Her Catholic family were very distraught. Uh, her relatives were very unhappy that she was marrying a Jew, but it was love, deep love, that these two people are going to have for one another. Wilhelmina Rana is from a Germanic Catholic family. She's only 2 years younger than her future husband, but she'll always be Bess and always, always be loved by him. Here are the two lovebirds, and they are very deeply in love. There is some rumor that he once cheated with somebody, but it's really doubtful because he was so busy in his business of magic and escape tricks. But they were a wonderful couple. Now, Harry was very short, and Bess was even tinier than her husband. But aside from that, there's a love triangle going on in this story. It's an amazing case of a mama's boy who cannot think of a day without kissing mama, um, seeing mama. And of course, what kind of a wife is going to tolerate something like this? But she does. Bess loves him, he loves her, and for the rest of his life, and of course, for the entire life of Cecilia Weiss, um, Bess, in order to keep her husband and for him to be happy, there's always mama. And they take care of mama. Cecilia dotes on her son and he dotes on her. And evidently, It was a good arrangement. Bess didn't seem to mind. And they never have children. So I'm showing you this picture early in the lecture. This is Marie, what's her name? Oh, Marie Blood. Yes, Marie Blood. It's an unusual last name, but she's the child of Bess's sister. So this is a niece that they are going to adopt and love. They don't actually raise her, but she's with them much of the time, and they dote on her as if she were their own child. So, who was Harry Houdini, and why was he famous? These are posters, and there are thousands of posters. They're collector's items, of course. And we're talking about the 1880s and the 1890s when he becomes enormously wealthy, and we'll see how that happens. Of course, they're living in New York City, and they're living in a tenement uptown somewhere in the 70s, the East 70s, I think, all the way on the East Side when it wasn't a rich neighborhood. And there's a lovely story about how Harry would go and stand on street corners. Of course, he quit school. He never was educated, and that's always going to bother him because he has a complex about being short, and he takes care of his body so that it's completely flexible and strong and gorgeous. He had a gorgeous physique. But when it came to his brain, he was very self conscious about not having gone to school. Of course, he learns English, speaks beautiful English. He barely has an accent. I don't think he had any because he came to America when he was 4 years old, so he wouldn't have an accent. It's just that his writing was lacking good grammar and good spelling because he didn't go to school almost since the third or fourth grade. I forgot when he quit school, but he, like I say, he ran away to the circus. Sounds funny when you say that, but it's true because circuses came around Wisconsin a lot, and he found it too fascinating, and he tried to make money to support his family, especially after his father begged him on his deathbed. His father died of some type of cancer, and Rabbi Samuel Mayor Samuel Weiss asked his son Harry, "Please take care of Mama after I'm gone," and that was a pledge that he would never, never, never break ever. So, yes, the cute story that I was about to tell you. He used to stand on street corners, lower Manhattan, and do tricks and make up stories and just entertain the people. And evidently, he did such a good job that they threw so many nickels into the hat on the sidewalk that he came home one day and he said, "Mama, Mama, shake me, Mama, shake me." So Cecilia shook her son. "Shake me harder, Mama, harder." And she started shaking him, and all the nickels were falling from his hat. He put them in the hat, the nickels where people gave money for his jokes and his storytelling and his performing. And he put the hat on his head, and when Mama shook him, all the nickels fell to the floor, and it was like raining gold. And Cecilia was absolutely thrilled, and so was Harry. So there was something called the dime store. I think they were dime something, dime, yeah, dime stores. Um, Maybe I got the words wrong, but they were little shops all along Lower Manhattan where a person could go in and pay a dime and walk through the store, and there would be entertainment. People doing magic tricks, people doing card tricks. There'd be a chicken in a cage that would tell your fortune, all kinds of crazy things that people would do on their lunch break in Lower Manhattan. And so that's where he started out as a kid doing tricks in a dime store. And he went from that to being the greatest name in magic ever. I mean, he may not have been the greatest magician. You find out by reading this wonderful book of Kenneth Silverman. He may not have been the greatest uh, magician in the world. He certainly was the greatest impresario to advertise himself. That's why the book, that's why the title of this book, Houdini, has three exclamation marks after the name, because that is how he promoted himself, with the exclamation marks. He wasn't Harry Houdini, he was Harry Houdini. So there are thousands of posters that are collected by magicians and other people who love Harry. Now, Harry had a brother named Houdin who went into business with him. When Harry started doing his acts, his card tricks in vaudeville, of course, this is the 1880s and the 1890s, so you know there was something called vaudeville, where people paid a nickel or a dime to see a multitude of acts of all different kinds. Harry's brother Hardin, well, originally they were called the Houdini brothers, but when they split up, Hardin went into show business on his own. And this is a poster for that. On the stage, in person, Hardin, brother of Houdini. Yes, they did the same act together. They were partners, but there's a reason why Houdini broke up with his brother and went on his own. And this is the reason. Remember her, little Bess? Well, Harry was not a very big man. He was short. I think he was 5'4". But Bess, she was under 5 feet, something like 4 feet 11 or 4 foot 10. She was tiny, and this picture shows how much smaller she was than her husband. And there's a reason that it was a marriage made in heaven. Not only did they really truly love each other, but it was very convenient that Bess was tiny, very short, and very slim, because she's going to come in handy through the rest of their lives together. She'll be the distraction on the stage in the fancy clothes and the sexy outfit that distracts the audience's eyeballs from what her husband is doing with a rabbit, with a bunch of cards, whatever it is. That's the reason there's a second person in the magic act, especially a woman, because everybody's looking at her. And so they developed this act called Metamorphosis. This magic trick is the most famous of all Harry Houdini's performances, and he developed it with Bess. At the end of this slideshow, I'm going to show you what it actually looked like. I'll just explain it quickly now. He put his wife in a burlap sack, tied up the sack, and she had handcuffs on her when he put her in there. And he put her in a trunk and locked up the trunk with a bunch of locks, a lot of locks. And then he stood on top of the trunk and he pulled down a curtain, and within a split second of the curtain going up, there was Bess holding the curtain, and her husband, after they unlocked the box with all the chains and locks around it, her husband was inside the box that had been locked and padlocked. He was inside a burlap sack, the same one that she went into the trunk with. Oh, yes, I'll show you some of that. That's truly amazing. That drove me crazy. The first time I ever saw anybody do it, I thought, holy cow, that's not possible. Nobody can, that must really be magic. Well, you know it isn't, right? It's just a trick. Well, what's going to develop to make Harry Houdini, now there are a million magicians. You know, there was no television, there was no radio in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. So, what did people do for entertainment? They went to vaudeville shows, or the circus came to their town, or people like these magicians and these all kinds of people came through their towns and villages and big cities, and people clamored for excitement. And oh my God, look at this naked man with a gorgeous body, and he made sure that he was gorgeous. By the way, well, you know that he was Jewish, and yes, that's going to be something else we'll talk about later. But he went into the escape. He specialized after he did a lot of card tricks, but that wasn't exciting enough. There were hundreds of people who did card tricks. I don't know how many other magicians did chains and lock escapist type of stuff, but he was just one of many. If it wasn't for his ability to promote himself in advertising and to spread the word about his name and his fame, his abilities, he wasn't that great of a magician. In the beginning, he had to hone his skills. And one of the things that he did was to learn everything there was to know about locks. Now, back in the 1880s and 1890s, the lock manufacturers, um, it's not like today where there are 1,000 varieties of locks and keys. Back then, they used skeleton keys for locks. And there weren't such a diversity of locks, and he memorized every single one. He would advertise people, he would promote himself by saying, "Bring the lock, bring the chain, tie me up, and there's no lock that can keep me bound." And so he became famous for challenging audiences to bring their own locks, bring your own chain, tie me up on the stage. I'm sitting in the chair, tie me up, and no chain, no lock can keep me bound. And that was true. He got out of everything. There are thousands of pictures like this, literally thousands. He promoted himself with photographs and good photographs. Now, he's completely naked in these pictures. Uh, you'll see more of him soon. Not really, I won't show you naked pictures, but I just want you to know that he is naked beneath the chains. He has no clothes on, and the chains and the locks are hiding his valuables, so to speak. So Houdini would go to a theater. He traveled around a lot, of course, and he would challenge the neighborhood to bring the locks from their houses. And people were absolutely stunned, completely stunned. Now, he memorized every lock. He knew the manufacturers of these locks. And his wife, remember her? She was all dressed in sexy tights and satin and sequins and beads at distract the audience. But she would always kiss her husband before he was put behind a curtain. Yes, he was put behind a curtain or within a cabinet, which was a wooden box in which he would unhook himself from these locks and chains, and nobody could actually see much of what he was doing. But he'd be out of it in a couple of minutes. Now, what people didn't know is that his wife, who was sweetly kissing him good luck, she was transferring the keys into his mouth. He knew every lock, and he knew what key would get him out of the chain. And she was transferring the skeleton key into his mouth when she kissed him good luck. Even if there were 100 locks manufactured in that day, they all basically had the same kind of key. It was a skeleton key. And Harry knew from hanging out with locksmiths, he knew the manufacturer of everything. Now, in one of those fantastic shows that he did in vaudeville, a man by the name of Martin Beck happened to be in the theater and was blown away by this youthful guy who was short but with a fabulous body and a fabulous personality. There is a theater in on Broadway called the Martin Beck Theater. He was an impresario and an agent, and he would send performers throughout Europe. Now, it just so happens, Martin Beck sent lots of performers on tour throughout Europe. All the nations of the world wanted to see American performers, American escape artists. This was a very, very big thing in the 1880s and 1890s. People doing tricks, people doing similar to what Harry Houdini was doing. Martin Beck was so impressed with him, but the real advantage that Harry Houdini had over many of the other American vaudevillians is that Harry spoke several languages. Harry could speak German, he could speak Hungarian, Yugoslav, Serbian, French, of course, German, and I think Italian. So it didn't matter where Martin Beck sent Harry Houdini. You'll see some of the places, the Orpheum, the Palace. These are in America, but Harry went around everywhere. He traveled the world endlessly for decades, and that's where he made his fame. Now, where did he get the name Houdini? It doesn't sound anything like the name Weiss or Weiss. Um, well, this is Robert Houdin, Houdin, Robert slash hyphen Houdin. It's a French early 1800s uh, artist who did magic tricks, and he was considered the greatest of his era, long dead, of course. And Erich took the name Houdin, Houdin, and added an I at the end to make it sound more exotic. And that's how, if you go on Jeopardy, that's the answer to the question of Harry Houdini's name. It's a very famous master artist, magician of the late 18th century, early 19th century. And this is another fellow that Harry Houdini idolized. His name was Harry Keller. He was born in Toronto, Canada, and he died in 1922, 4 years before Harry Houdini passes away. Harry Keller was a genius, and here is a poster, a Keller poster, because he raised women. There are secrets to all of these magic tricks, and it's not considered nice or what's the word? It's not ethical or even moral to tell the secrets of these acts because you're stealing a person's livelihood. Who is going to make a living if everybody in the audience knows the secret behind the trick? But I will tell you a few of the, I will tell you a couple of secrets as I show you the pictures. And here's, there are thousands. This man loved to be photographed. He loved it. He had himself photographed a million times, and there are so many photographs on the internet. But here is another trick he pulled. He went into a milk can. Now, I know a lot of people don't know what a milk can is these days because we get milk in plastic containers. But in Harry Houdini's day, milk was delivered from a milk can on top of a horse and buggy, a horse-drawn buggy. The milkman had a ladle, and he would ladle out the milk and deliver it to you in a glass bottle. And so these milk cans he got himself an empty one, and because he was short and slight, he did a magic trick with a milk can, and several times he almost died because the can would be locked with from the outside with locks, and he couldn't get out. His trick didn't work a couple of times. And here he is with the chains around his arms. Now, before I go on to Marjorie Crandon, because he's going to get in trouble with this lady, and no, it's not a love affair that he has with her, although she probably had a love interest in Harry. Um, Harry Houdini spent decades around the world on tour, United States, crisscrossing the country a million times, Europe, all around. There wasn't a country he didn't visit. And as soon as he got off the train, he would go straight to the local newspaper of that town, village, or city, and he would challenge the people in whatever language it was, Dutch, Swedish, German, French, Italian. He would challenge the local people to bring your own locks, bring your own chains, and tie me up, and I will escape because there is no chain, there is no lock that will hold me back. And every single time, as a matter of fact, he would go to the police department of a town or village and he would tell them that he wanted to be locked up in a prison cell, and the whole neighborhood should come and wait because he'll be out of the cell in a couple of minutes. And every single time he got out of jail on his own, well, that's another question. Because it's probable that he paid off the policeman for the key and got himself out of the jail cell with the key that he paid for, because by this time he was quite filthy rich, enormously rich. He's going to buy a townhouse on 113th Street in Harlem, which was a fabulous neighborhood for many people who were rich back then. Not everybody was, but he certainly was. And he took his mother and his brothers and he paid for their education and he took care of mama. There was no trick that he ever did. Most of them were quite dangerous, but there was no trick that he ever did in which um, he wasn't hoping that mama could watch him. He was a mama's boy. He loved her so much, and he would say later in his own memoir that he did it all for mama, imagining that she was watching, even if she wasn't there. So he's going to get in trouble with this lady. I think I put her picture into this slideshow a little bit too soon. Yes, I did. So let's just come back to Marjorie Crandon. Let's just remember her name, Marjorie Crandon. Minna was her real name. Marjorie uh, was her stage. She didn't go on a stage, but well, you'll understand in a few minutes. She lived in Boston and she was married to a famous gynecologist doctor. Okay, now Harry Houdini was very embarrassed that he'd never gone to school because now he's filthy rich and he's embarrassed that he had no education. The Right Way to Do Wrong was a book that he wrote himself. It's an expose of successful criminals because what's going to happen is that with all of his chain performances, he gets out of every lock. Nobody knows how he's doing it. But then again, it's entertainment, isn't it? It's just entertainment. It has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with science, unless if you call fooling people sleight of hand a science, well, then that's what he was doing, science. He wrote this book called The Right Way to Do Wrong. And the reason he wrote this is to alert the public who was beginning to think, because they'd never seen anything like this. He invented all of his acts in which he would throw himself in a sealed coffin, like, the coffin was made of metal and it was soldered together. He would be thrown in the East River or the St. Louis River, whatever river there was. He traveled around the world and he's soldered. The people are watching the men soldering the coffin after he got in it with handcuffs. And they're going to throw this in the Missouri, what's that called? That famous river that's very long. Whatever it was, the East River, the Harlem River, whatever. And thousands, 20,000 people would be watching as they tossed the casket in. They watched him get in with handcuffs. They watched the men soldering the coffin shut, and then it goes into the river, and he's going to escape from that. Are you kidding? Well, people held their breath, and under the water that nobody could see was Harry Houdini, already out of the chains, already out of the coffin. You see, because nobody realized that the nails holding the coffin together was a quarter of an inch long. So all he had to do with his handcuffs, which he took off immediately, he would elbow the side of the casket and the whole thing fell apart in the water. And he would just stay under the water, holding his breath for as long as he could, so that the people up above, 20,000 people, are watching and they're holding their breath too. And they think he's dead. They think he's drowned. Oh my God, where is he? Where is he? And then he would suddenly pop up. Everybody would breathe a sigh of relief and go completely berserk. Who could do a thing like this? Well, here's the problem. When you're so successful and you're convincing people every day of your life that you are a magician, well, some people don't realize this is an act. It's a performance, sleight of hand. It's not real. This is a trick, folks. But nope, lots and lots of people believed it was real. And in order to believe that this man got out of a casket underwater that had been sealed and soldered, oh no, there's only one way that it could have been done. And you know what that is? He walked through, he has psychic abilities, and he walked through the walls of the box. He's a magician, all right. He has psychic spiritual abilities. Now, this really, really bothered Houdini because he was doing tricks. These are just, you know, illusions. What you think you're looking at is not really happening. He wasn't really, really being soldered into that casket. He wasn't really, really handcuffed and chained inside. The box fell apart in the water in one split second, and he held his breath for minutes and minutes at an end. For a very long time, he held his breath, and people above are going nuts. They think he's dead. And how in the world could he have survived that? Well, he must be beyond human. And that's why he wrote this book. The Right Way to Do Wrong is a book explaining that magic is an entertainment and there are people who are criminals who use the same exact tactics as a magician uses in order to steal your money, steal your car, steal your house, steal your money, steal you. And so he tried to explain this, and Harry had he was very self-conscious of not having had a proper education. So he wrote and wrote many books, and this is one of the most famous. And another thing that he felt he had to do was to collect rare books and manuscripts. And so, believe it or not, in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., there is the Harry Houdini collection of rare books and manuscripts. He bought when he was so rich. He spent his money very wisely on rare books. He had manuscripts of Abraham Lincoln, letters that Abraham Lincoln wrote And he had things like this, believe it or not. Galileo Galilei had written Siderius Nuncius, and Harry Houdini had an original copy. Believe it or not, he was one of the greatest manuscript collectors in our country, and everything that he collected belongs to the Library of Congress. He didn't sell it at auction, he handed it over to the Smithsonian Institute, and it's in the Library of Congress today. So that's because he didn't have an education. He educated himself, and this is the mansion that he owned, 113th Street. This is the street it's on. There's a guy in the middle of the gutter pointing to it because he's a tour guide. On the front of the door, there is this plaque. The magician Houdini, the magician, lived here from 1904 to 1926, collecting illusional, theatrical memorabilia and books on psychic phenomena and magic, famous for daring escapes, no restraints, ropes, chains, straitjackets, bank vaults, jail cells. Nothing could hold Harry Houdini. The straitjacket is mentioned here. So, oh yes, and here is one of those. Um, I don't know what state this is in, but he's about to be put in this casket and soldered in or nailed down. If it's wood, then they nailed him in. Um, yeah, there he is again, getting ready to go under the ocean. Okay, here is the straitjacket. Harry would go to mental institutions and hang out with the doctors and the orderlies and the patients. And he learned, just as he hung out with locksmiths to learn how to open up locks and chains, he he was the unique performer who um, perfected the use of the straitjacket in escape art. He becomes, as a matter of fact, Houdini is not so much famous as a straight magician or a card trick person. He's famous as an escape artist. And there's nothing like a straitjacket to make people go crazy watching you escape from such a contraption. And here is a picture of him in one. And here, this is what you may have heard Houdini was doing in later years of his career. I guess, he ramped up the dangers. Certainly, this is extremely dangerous. He knew what he was doing. He's first. Let me explain. He's hanging upside down from a crane from the Woolworth building in New York City. There's about 20, 30,000 people below him on the street, and they're watching him wriggling out of a straitjacket because he's not simply upside down chained. He's upside down chained and wrapped in a straitjacket. And of course, he wriggles out of it. He manages, this is not the Woolworth building. I don't know what this building is, but he did it all over the country. And here are the people waiting for him to fall because they think that's what's going to happen. But of course, he never falls and he always gets out of the straitjacket. But you have to realize that even though he knew what he was doing, getting out of the chains, the locks, upside down on a crane in a windy day, perhaps, the wind could bang him against the window. The wind could suddenly come up and bang him against the building facade. His head could get broken. His ribs did get broken many times. And these were very, very dangerous performances. He was risking his life, of course. And then he developed another challenging act, and that was the water torture chamber. He would be upside down, lowered by a crane. This was done indoors on a stage in a theater. and he'd be upside down in water up to his ankles, and he would escape from that. One time he didn't escape and he almost died. He also made elephants disappear. That's another trick. And he was the first aviator because with all the money that he had, he could afford to buy planes. He was the first man ever to fly Australia in the age when those men with the flying machines, like Charles Lindbergh, although this is way before Charles Lindbergh, he's going to go to Australia, buy his own airplane, and fly it all over the country. So he was the first Australian pilot, though he's an American citizen. And then, because he had so much money, he went into movies, and he goes out to California, and he makes a lot of films in the silent era of the 20s. There's only one problem with making movies as a famous magician. It doesn't work. Theater is okay, live theater, people sitting in front of the stage and they're oohing and eyeing, but when you go to a theater and you watch magic tricks in a movie, it just loses something in the performance. You never know if what you're watching is real and it's not as exciting. So he was an utter failure in Hollywood. He couldn't make a living. Well, he made already a living for 5 centuries. Took care of his mother, his brothers, his wife, but the Hollywood industry was not a good industry for this type of performance. And so, speaking of performance and industry, Hollywood and movies, this is a British uh, Shakespearean actress, stage actress. Everybody's heard of Sarah Bernhardt. She was a very close friend of Harry Houdini. And she was also Jewish, like he was. That's her. Uh, Not long before she dies, I think 1923, she passes away. It was some type of cancer. That's Bess and Harry looking up. This is Bess and Harry. They're looking at Sarah Bernhardt. Okay, so here's another Do Spirits Return? Houdini says no, and he proves it. 3 shows in one. Well, what is all this about? Remember, there are thousands of people who cannot believe what he has done. They threw him in a coffin, and they threw the coffin under the water. He comes out. Well, the only answer to all of this is that Harry Houdini has magic powers. He walks through walls. That's how he gets out of the chains. And he has special powers. And Harry was very upset. He kept telling everybody, there's no such thing. There's no spirit. Folks, this is a trick. I'm fooling you. It's all an illusion. Don't believe that I have magical powers because I don't. And nobody believed him. He tried to tell the audiences, don't try this at home, but don't believe that I'm magical. I'm not. I'm an entertainer. But people didn't believe him. Sir Oliver Lodge was a brilliant scientist. As you can see, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth. I'm sorry, Queen Victoria. And Sir Oliver Lodge was a major scientist of his day. In the 1890s, he was already, I think he was already knighted by then, but Sir Oliver Lodge had a son whose name was Raymond. And in 1914, when Europe went to war, in a war that never should have happened, um, Sir Oliver Lodge lost his son Raymond, who you will see here. Millions of people were dead from that horrific war. It was an atrocity, a world atrocity, World War One. Of course, it didn't have a number at that time. It was just called the Great World War. Well, the heartache of millions of parents who lost their sons in the war, Sir Oliver Lodge was no different. Even though he was brilliant at engineering and brilliant in physics and science, he had been knighted. He couldn't deal with the loss of his only child. And so he wrote a book. The book was called Raymond. This is Raymond Revised, but this is the story of how Sir Oliver Lodge, the genius, the scientific genius, how he spoke to Raymond every day. Raymond was on the other side, of course. Raymond had gone somewhere beyond the beyonds in death, but he claimed, Oliver Lodge claimed, that he spoke with his son every day, and his son Raymond would tell him, "I'm fine, Father. It's very nice here where I am. It's lovely, and someday you will join me in this lovely paradise." And so Sir Oliver Lodge published a book at a time, like 1920, at a time when millions of other parents were mourning the loss of their children from the war. And it gave hope to a lot of people. Of course, it's not true. He couldn't be talking to his son, but that's what the craze became in the 1920s because of the war and the loss of so many young people. It became the craze, Ouija boards and mind reading and psychics and tarot card and rapping and tapping and seances. And this is the book that initiated all of that hysteria. Everybody wanted to talk to their loved ones after death. And here was the chance. Here's Raymond. And here is Harry, who didn't believe in any of that. Harry was an atheist. Harry did not believe in religion or spiritualism. And as he saw, by the way, this photograph is taken in Atlantic City. Some relatives, I don't know who everyone is in this picture, but it is Atlantic City. And I put it in there for a reason. But Harry kept trying to alert the public to the reality because he could not believe that anybody thought what he was doing was real. And he kept trying to wake people up by writing books and warning people in his audience, this is just a trick. So one of the people who didn't believe it was a trick is this gentleman and his wife. This man is shaking Harry's hand in Atlantic City because this man is a famous author. That is his wife with him. And their name is Doyle, Doyle. This is Mr. Doyle and his wife, Lady Doyle. They lived literally in a castle in England. And Lady Doyle was a psychic. She did seances. You know why? Because her son died in World War One, and every day she wanted to talk to her departed son, and her husband helped her. His name was, having also been knighted by Queen, I guess it was Queen Victoria. I could be wrong about that. It might have been Victoria's son. But this is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. They were very good friends, Harry and Sir Arthur and Lady Doyle. Now, What I haven't yet told you is that Cecilia died in 1914. She didn't die while Harry was home so that he could hold her in his arms and caress his mother and tell her everything will be okay and hold her hand. No, 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 no. He was in Holland or Denmark, I forget where, but in a foreign country when he got the telegram that his mother died. It didn't look like Harry would ever work again. He passed out, he cried, he screamed, he was never the same after Cecilia died. And I don't remember what she died from, but it was a disease. I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. He never was the same again after that. Now, Harry knew that he was tricking the whole world with his acts, his escape acts. He knew how to escape. People looking at him could never figure out how he did anything. But Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife believed that Harry was walking through the coffin, walking through walls. They believed in spiritualism because they had to, for the same reason that Sir Oliver also had to believe in spiritualism and psychic phenomenon. His reason, same exact reason as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and millions of other parents. Their children were gone too young. They died much too young in a stupid war that should never have existed. And Arthur Conan Doyle said to Harry on Atlantic City Boardwalk when they met, because Doyle was giving a tour, going on tour of America at the time. And they met on the boardwalk of Atlantic City. And that's when they said to Harry, "Oh, we're so sorry to hear about your mother, Cecilia, but it's not so bad. You could talk to her." And Harry said, "No, I can't." And they said, "Of course you can. Come, and my wife, Lady Doyle, will bring your mother's spirit back." Now, Harry Houdini did not believe in this because he knew too much about fooling people. He knew how to fool thousands and thousands of people by tricking them into thinking what they're looking at is real, and he knew how to do this. So he didn't trust spiritualists tapping on Ouija boards and hearing voices in the dark and holding hands around the table that's moving up and down. He knew too much about magic. But when Sir Arthur, who was a dear friend, they admired each other tremendously. When Doyle asks Harry, come to the hotel, and my wife will bring your mother back. Well, this was too much for Harry, much too much for him. He'd give anything to talk to Mama again. Remember what I said. Harry was a mama's boy. He loved his mother very, very much and he was broken up so badly he didn't work for another 6 months after she died. So he goes to the hotel in Atlantic City and he meets them in the dark. They have a seance, and Lady Doyle goes into a trance. This is about 1918, 1919. The war is over, actually. And Lady Doyle goes into a trance, and suddenly there is the voice of Cecilia Weiss. And Lady Doyle picks up a pen and begins to scribble, scribble, scribble on paper, scribble, 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 and then she faints and the lights go on and she gives Harry the papers and there are Cecilia's words and expressions to her son. Lady Doyle, I forget what they call, she's the intermediary. In other words, when she goes into the trance, the dead person who's hovering in the room, supposedly, uses Lady Doyle's hand and body and mind to write out the thoughts on a piece of paper. And so Harry walks out of the hotel very, very happy. He has spoken, his mother has spoken to him. He hasn't spoken to her, but she's written out all these messages through Lady Doyle. He's got a big smile on his face and he walks out. Now, what's about to happen a year or two later, and there is Sherlock Holmes, the invention, let's not forget, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who has just taken Harry Houdini, the greatest trickster in history. Uh, Doyle, who invented Sherlock Holmes, the man who knows everything. He could just look at the cigarette butt in an ashtray and know who the killer is. Uh, the man who invented him believes in psychic phenomenon, which is very strange because if you remember, Sherlock Holmes dealt in principles of rational thinking, dealt in scientific explanations for why this happened and why that happened. And the man who invented him believes in psychic phenomenon. Well, this is too much for Harry to believe and for us as well. But you're not going to believe this if you've never heard it before. I'm not making this up. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a book called The Coming of the Fairies. He wrote this book in defense of two little children, girls, in a small cottage, in a small village, in a place called Cottingley. That's a picture of one of the girls on the cover. There's Edith and Elsie, and they believed in fairies. And when the whole world was laughing at these two children, Arthur Conan Doyle went to their home, investigated the garden where they met these fairies every day and took pictures with the fairies. And Arthur Conan Doyle supported the little girls. They were like 11, 10, and 11 years old. Somebody had bought them a camera and they were taking pictures of themselves with the fairies. So let's see. This is the garden that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle visited. It's called Cottingley Gardens. It's in England. It's a beautiful backyard. And here is Elsie. I think it's Elsie. I'm sorry, it may be the other. It may be Frances. Right, it's Frances. Well, Frances had all these friends that were little fairies, and every time somebody went to the garden and asked Frances to show the fairies to them, the fairies wouldn't come out. Oh no, the fairies don't like you. They're afraid of you. They only come out for me. And Frances took pictures of herself. See, doesn't move. Hmm. There. Okay, so I don't know if this is Frances or Elsie, but there's the fairy. Of course it was a hoax. Of course it was. Here's another photograph that they took of themselves. Yes, but most people, so what was happening in England at this time? It's like 1919, 1918, 1919. And of course, I hope you understand that what I'm saying is that this is a terrible time. The aftermath, not only of World War One, where millions of young men are dead, uh, having lost legs and arms, they were blind, they were broken from the war, and so many dead all over Europe. On top of that came the flu. The flu pandemic killed more people than the war did. Many, many millions of people were now going to die from the flu epidemic. So we're talking about a time in which people had to believe in something, some way that they could speak to their loved ones, because most of the people who died from the flu and from the war, they were young. They were 18 to 20-year-old people. And what kind of parents you know, didn't want to. The losses were heartbreaking, and people wanted to believe that they could someday speak to their children again. So spiritualism and magical thinking was very, very popular. And these children pulled off a hoax that the inventor of Sherlock Holmes, if there's one character in human history that represents rational thinking, it would be Sherlock Holmes. Of course, he wasn't a real person. He was an invention of a man who believed in fairies. This is just the first time I heard about this, I just couldn't believe it because I grew up reading Sherlock Holmes, of course, like everyone else. So that's the reason why the Ouija board was so popular. Seances were popular because your loved ones could come back from the dead and speak to you. Harry didn't believe any of this. And what he did, yes, there's something important before I go on with this. Let's track back a little bit. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, when he got involved with the fairies, people began not only arguing with him publicly in the newspapers, they began condemning him, just the way I did. You invented Sherlock Holmes and you believe in fairies? What's wrong with you, Mr. Doyle? And in his own defense, Arthur Conan Doyle made a statement. I think it was printed in the newspaper, but he said to somebody, well, if you don't believe me about the fairies and the spiritualism, well, you could ask Harry Houdini. He's the greatest magician in the world, the greatest escape artist in the world. And if he believes in it, well, how could you yell at me? When Harry Houdini read that, he was so upset. And this is the reason why. Well, he argued back with Conan Doyle by writing a letter to a newspaper. And this is what he said. Yes, it's true. I went to a seance that Lady Doyle gave in honor of my mother, my poor dear dead mother. And Lady Doyle went into a trance and she scribbled and scribbled away in my mother's name. There's only one problem with what Lady Doyle did, and that is simply that my mother never spoke one word of English in her whole life. My mother only spoke Yiddish, and Lady Doyle wrote out page after page only in English. But I knew that wasn't my mother because my mother didn't know any English. And my mother kept referring to me as Harry, 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 but my mother never called me Harry a day in her life. I was Erich, 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 mein Bubbeler, Erich. And so that's the reason that Harry Houdini walked out of the Atlantic City Hotel that day smiling with a big grin. Because Arthur Conan Doyle was such a world famous author, beloved by millions, Harry kept his mouth shut and never said a word about what a fraud Lady Doyle was. How what a trickster she was to try to make me believe that that was my mother from the dead talking to me. Harry never said a word, but when Arthur Conan Doyle used Harry's name as a backup to support his own visions of fairies in a garden in England, Harry couldn't hold back anymore, and he exposed Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife as frauds in the seance business, whatever. They didn't charge money for it, but in the seance, in the realm of seance and spiritualism, they were total charlatans, both of them. And they never spoke to each other ever again. It was finished. Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini never saw each other again, never spoke, never wrote anything. Now, Harry Houdini knew the greatest people on earth, Teddy Roosevelt, and everybody wanted to know Harry Houdini, and so here he is. He's now going to devote the last segment of his life. He dies in 1926. So around 1920, he decides that he's going to go after the charlatans. He's going to go after the crystal ball readers and the palm readers and the people who steal your money to tell you that your daughter is alive and well on a cloud in heaven. Oh, yes, he's going to do it. So, how does he accomplish this? Well, actually, he didn't really accomplish it because you probably never knew it. Most people never knew that, this is back in 1920, so how many people would remember or know about this? Um, Harry Houdini dressed up like a little old man with a cane and glasses, and he schlepped around New York or Minneapolis or wherever he was. And he went to palm readers and he went to crystal ball readers, and he figured out how they're doing their magic tricks and how they're fooling people. Well, it's pretty easy. You tell somebody that you're going to talk to their dead child, and they'll come up with any amount of money, and he did this for till the rest of his life. So one of the people that he got involved with was that woman, Marjorie Crandon, whose picture I showed you too early. This is a book that's being made into a film, and I cannot wait to see the film. The Witch of Lime Street. Uh, the Scientific American decided, now this is a great magazine, devoted to science, and they came out with a contest. They were going to pick a psychic or somebody who claimed to be bringing people from the dead back to talk to living people. They're going to have not just a contest, but a scientific investigation. They're going to pick somebody, and it's going to be Marjorie, that woman whose picture I showed you a few minutes ago. She was married to a gynecologist and she lived on Beacon Hill in Boston, very wealthy woman. She claimed she could talk to the dead. She had a brother who died and wanted to talk to him, so that's how she got involved. But the Scientific American chose 4 scientists who would be sitting in on these seances of Marjorie. And one of the 4 men was Harry Houdini. And here is Marjorie being, I don't know what she's doing there. Well, it's a seance. And this is the kind of thing that these psychic people would do. They would get wax from their ears, from their nose, it's disgusting. And they were all holding hands in the dark, and they would hear ringing of bells. And if they were all holding each other's hands, then who's ringing the bells? Who's blowing the trumpet? Who's doing what? It's all trickery. And Harry Houdini knew the tricks. And he exposed Marjorie, and she didn't get the money. It was something like $10,000. The reward money was if you could prove that you actually accomplished uh, your claims to be bringing the departed back to talk to their relatives. These are ear trumpets. The psychics used all kinds of gimmickry. Now, we're getting to the end. This is Saul Bloom, who was from Brooklyn. He and Harry Houdini became very close friends, and Saul Bloom was also in Congress. He During the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, Saul Bloom, as a young man, had gone. He worked for the fair, 1893. What did they call it? The Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Saul had gone to Egypt and brought back Little Egypt, the belly dancer, but he also invented a song. It's called The Streets of Cairo, and it goes like da 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 da. There are words to that, but that's if you ever go on Jeopardy and they ask you da 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 da, that's Saul Bloom's song. He wrote it. Ay, ay, ay. So Saul Bloom later on becomes a congressman, And Harry Houdini hooks up with Saul Bloom because so many people are being ripped off by palm readers and crystal ball readers and fortune tellers that the government decides to crack down on these people, dishonest charlatans, all of them. So they go to Congress, and Harry Houdini gives his testimony because he's been dressing himself up like an old man with a cane and glasses for years and going around detecting how these fortune tellers trick people. And he knows all the tricks, every trick in the book. Now, there's a reason why Congress never, ever passes any law against spiritualist churches and spiritualism, places where you go to have your dead relatives come back and talk to you or give you a sign. It's never going to happen. It didn't happen in 1920s when Harry and Saul Bloom were trying to protect the citizens of New York. It ain't going to happen now, and it ain't going to happen in the future. And here's the reason: religion. If you try to suppress spiritualist mind readings, seances, fortune tellings, these people, these charlatans who prey upon the bereaved citizens, the desperate citizens who, like Harry himself, let's not forget, he's a desperate citizen too. He would give anything to talk to Celia. He's guilt ridden that his mother died without him holding her in his arms. He was just blown away and never going to work another day in his life. Of course, he did go back to work eventually. He couldn't function without his mother. But the problem was trying to protect other people like himself from the temptation of spending money on such foolishness and charlatanry. In doing that, they're up against the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, I forget which amendment it is. Yes, First Amendment, freedom of religion, because the charlatans claim it's a religion. The people who go to the charlatans claim it's their religion. So you can't deprive anybody in this country of going to a charlatan. Yes, that's the sad truth. And so the sad truth is this: the man on the left here is James Randi, who passed away a few months ago, and he was a very dear friend of mine here in Florida. This is Johnny Carson. The amazing Randy appeared on Johnny Carson's show so many times because Johnny Carson loved magic tricks, and Randy was a magician, of course. And on this particular night, Randy exposed a charlatan on the Johnny Carson show. His name was Peter Popoff. James Randi, it's a very long story, so I'll spare you, but Peter Popoff had been uh, making people throw away their crutches. You've seen these healing uh, tent, revival tent meetings where 1,000 people are in the audience and the preacher is healing everybody by touching them and speaking in tongues, and the man throws away his crutches and he gets up and walks for the first time in his life. Well, the guy is a charlatan, and Randy figured out how he was doing it with an earpiece in his ear, and his wife was sitting in the audience gathering up in private information and telling her husband, oh, this lady just had her kidneys operate, this lady just had breast cancer, and the lady in the green hat had a bunion on her toe, and blah, 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 blah. So he was a charlatan. Randy exposes him, Peter Popoff, on this show, on this particular evening. I guess you wouldn't be surprised if I tell you that Peter Popoff is back on television these days. This happened 30 years ago. But here is James Randi, the amazing Randy, who passed away, I think it was October or November, and I knew him for 20 years. A very dear friend. And um, the reason I'm telling you this is because Randy spent his entire career also in the footsteps of Harry Houdini, trying to tell audiences after he wowed them and wooed them with all of his escape tricks and his card tricks and his psychic tricks, he would tell every audience, this is just an act. I do not have psychic powers. I'm fooling you. Well, there was somebody who was going around the world fooling people and telling them that he had magical powers. His name was, let me see, oh my goodness, Uri Geller. That's him. The bender of spoons and forks and knives. He's claimed, Uri Geller, an Israeli guy, went around for decades. I think he's selling holy water these days on television, but Randy exposed him for the charlatan that he is. Uri Geller had a trick how to bend these objects. He was doing it on every television show. And wherever he went, Randy went after him and showed the audience. And Barbara Walters and Johnny Carson and everybody whose show had Uri Geller on, Randy would appear later on another night and do the trick and explain to people how it was done. It's just a trick. Here we get to the cemetery, unfortunately, so I've got to wind up this entire show. We're in the cemetery in Queens, Cypress Hills. It's Machpelah Cemetery. It's the Hungarian cemetery, Jewish Hungarian cemetery, and that is where Harry is going to be buried, next to his mother. That's Bess over here as a widow, and one of Harry's brothers. They all became doctors. Harry is going to die from a burst appendix. Nobody could save him in 1926 because there was simply no antibiotic available. It was not invented yet. There was no way to save the man in the moon or the king of Siam. Didn't matter who you were. A broken, he spent a week in a hospital in Detroit, Michigan, knowing he was going to die because he had peritonitis. Somebody had punched him in the stomach and he was now going to die. So he and Bess made up a story between just the two of them. They made up a phrase that nobody else knew, just they did. And he agreed that after death, if it was possible, because what did he know? Do any of us know what's doing after we die? We don't know. Even though he was an atheist and he didn't believe in life after death, but maybe there was a possibility. And so they made up a sentence that only they knew, that that on the anniversary of his death, which is going to be Halloween, it's amazing, but he died. He was punched and took ill a week before Halloween, and Halloween is the anniversary of Harry Houdini's death. He's going to be buried in a casket that was made for his tricks underwater. He took his mother's letters, wrapped them into a silk pillow, and that's what he's buried with in that casket in Queens, New York. But that sentence that he and his wife made up secretly, she waited for more than a decade and held a seance on the evening of his death every year and waited for the psychic, the seance person, to repeat the words that she and her husband had made up before he died. And never did anybody bring up the words of Harry Houdini in any seance. So Bess moved to Miami Beach. She got married, I believe, there and died there in 1943. He died in 1926. He was only 52 years old, and she could not be buried. She could not be buried in Machpelah because she was not Jewish. I don't remember where exactly she's buried, but it's not with him. He's with his mother. And this is the monument. Now, if you watch the Tony Curtis performance of the movie Houdini made in the 1950s, it's all wrong. He didn't die upside down in the water chamber like they have the ending of this movie. I don't know why they did that, because it's not true. Here is Adrian Brody in a series made for HBO a couple of years ago, a movie series, and it's wonderful. Adrian Brody playing Harry Houdini. And if you really want to see a great movie about magic and psychic phenomenon and charlatanry, a really fabulous documentary, it's called An Honest Liar. And it's a film made a couple of years ago on the life of James Randi, who emulated Harry Houdini. So you'll see a lot of famous magicians like Penn and Teller, David Copperfield. They're all in this film, and it's wonderful. You can get it on Netflix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the greatest. How do I get out of this? I'm going to show you the greatest act that Harry and Bess. Oh, stop share. Share. Harry and Bess invented a magic act called Metamorphosis. So I'd like you to see it because it's truly wonderful. Here it goes.
First of all, Bess did the metamorphosis switch faster than Brother Theo.
The Pendragons are recognized as the world masters of physical grand illusion and were just named Magicians of the Year by the Academy of Magical Arts. They have redefined metamorphosis. Houdini would have been proud and probably even amazed. Tonight, a record-breaking event. The Pendragons present the fastest version of this illusion ever achieved. Don't blink. Here are the Pendragons.
Sorry.
Today on Channel.
Oop. There I am. I hope you were able to see that. Oh no, where is it? Oh my goodness. Well, there we go. So I hope you've enjoyed Harry Houdini because I love everything I ever read about him except for his untimely death. He was an egomaniac about himself, promoting himself all over the world. But anyway, enjoy yourself this week and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Bye bye.